How are you?
Okay.
Get your arms checked on.
What do you mean?
This house was built in 1860 by William Poole. Or really it was built by Dr. Joshua Gilbert for his daughter, Sarah, who married William Poole. William Poole, Dr. Gilbert, to point out to you, is his home is over near the Nature Preserve. He was the first physician in Atlanta. He was educated at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. He and his brother moved down from South Carolina near where Clemson is now. And they settled in this area after the Indian removal. He was the first physician in Atlanta. His brother, also Dr. Gilbert, Dr. William Gilbert, was the first physician in Fulton County. So they were both formally trained, which was unusual. A lot of physicians were trained by the apprentice method. They would work with another doctor for a while and they would get sort of certified that way, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But these guys were formally trained, and they were very good. There was a picture at the AMA in Atlanta, downtown, of Dr. Joshua Gilbert, the first physician. Now, his home was at the Nature Preserve. Everything was good. He was taking care of people after the Indian removal in 1822. And then what happened? Everything was nice and peaceful in Georgia. He was doing well. His daughter married William Poole, and they decided to create a new institution in Atlanta that was lacking, the Atlanta Medical College. 1856 it was created. One of the first students is William Poole, who just happened to be dating Dr. Gilbert's daughter. This is a house they built in 1860. They started the exterior, it's antebellum, but when you go inside, it is Victorian, because they finished it after the war. Now, when you look at all the maps of the Civil War, here's something that they won't tell you. There were hundreds of people that lived in this part of Atlanta. But when you look at the maps prepared by the Union engineers, it only shows a few houses with names. Do you know why that is? They only marked the houses that were occupied. A very important thing. So the head house was at the end of the road down here. If you go down Dodson. Now this road right here, just to put it in perspective for you, this road did not run here. Let's take a look right up here for a second while we're outside. If you look up the hill, if you look up at the hill right there, do you see the gray house? And do you see the line of the earth there?
Yep.
That's not the guy's yard. It looks like his driveway. It's not his driveway. That's the original East Point Road. The East Point Road ran through the woods. And if you take a really good look over here, you can see the yellow carriage house for this house right here. And that was where you stopped first to come and visit.
Now, is it
Dr.
still
Poole.
extant, that carriage house?
It is still there. It certainly is. But it's owned by my neighbor, Radcliffe Bailey, who's a...
And it's in the woods on there, huh?
It is. So we'll walk and see if you can...
So it was along the original East Point Road, huh?
It was on the original East Point Road.
Which would make sense because travelers would be on that road.
We can see it. I think you can see it. It's just grown up. But it's a yellow house. And
Why would they stop there first?
you stopped at the carriage house to be greeted with your horses.
Okay.
You people on horseback. It runs right there. The house is right. It's a yellow house. It's...
Okay.
Yeah, well, you can sort of...
Oh, yeah, I see it.
You can sort of...
And that's antebellum, too?
No, it is. It is. It's as old as this house. It was probably built afterwards. This house was built in 1860. It was the only house on the East Point Road. So you would come down the East Point Road this way, and when the Union troops proceeded down the East Point Road, they went that way. Later, because it's a superior route, the pipeline company ran the pipelines down along that part of the ridge and not this one. The reason, I'm full of stories, so...
No, let me ask you a quick question. The yellow house, the traveler's house, is that accessible by road today, or is it just in the woods?
It's on private property, and it's owned by Radcliffe Bailey.
Okay.
He does not like visitors.
I see.
I can coordinate something special, but
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
I have an artist who is
Can you
supposed...
get by road, though, or do you have to take wood?
My
The road
neighbor's
right by my
yard is
house?
right there. My neighbor's driveway is right there. So,
Oh, okay. Now I know. Never mind.
holy crap.
Yeah, we're going to get ran over.
To give a presentation for this group.
You're going to ask the guy to wear the dress?
Huh?
Ask the guy to wear the dress on him.
You're fine.
No, I ain't gonna.
You're fine.
I've been thrown up in my dad's.
So, I got off track.
My fault. All right,
So when
go ahead.
people came, they would stop at the carriage house. Then they would come up my neighbor's driveway here. And there was, in fact, a roundabout right here at one time. Because why do you have roundabouts? Because you cannot turn a carriage around. You need a roundabout. That's the only way to turn a carriage around. There was a roundabout right here. Around 1920, Dr. Adams whose father was in the Civil War. And Dr. Adams owned all this 300 acres, and he donated it. He was a city councilman. He wanted to preserve the entrenchments from the Civil War that are in Adams Park. He also was instrumental in preserving what is now Greenwood Cemetery and John A. White Park, because the entrench lines run through there, Mosley Park, Peachtree Battle, all of these areas, okay? But 300 acres was donated by Dr. Adams. So for the establishment of Adams Park to preserve the battle site that the troops fought in, because this was hallowed ground. You know, it was. They didn't care about preserving the Union side. Now, after the Battle of Utoy Creek, the Union Army swang like a gate along Dodson, like this. And there were Southern troops right along here. How do I know this? Because I found bullets just on top of the ground. I mean, in a line, that just after it rained. Unbelievable. So for a short period of time, it might have been a matter of hours, there were troops on this part of the ridge in front of the house. Then they withdrew to the next ridge right behind the house, and then they withdrew to Willis Mill. There's a line of Southern rifle pits facing this way. Why would the Union Army put a rifle pit or a foxhole on the back of their lines? No. Southerners were slowly removing themselves back after the Battle of Utoy Creek, and then they fell into the main prepared line over at Adams Park. But at first, on the 5th of August, 1864, Hood's plan was to block. The Union Army was attempting to go around the flank, so he was trying to establish a line that would go out parallel to the Sandtown Road, which is now Cascade. Okay, and that was the purpose of this engagement. When they were flanked, they later withdrew back.
Now, the Union Army wanted to get at the railroad, right?
The Union Army wanted to break through this line here and get to the railroad. Here's an interesting thing, and I'm going to show you on my map when I get up there, and I'll talk about it.
Okay.
I call it, my coined phrase, if you won't steal it from me, I call it an acoustic anomaly, because the Utoy Valley carries sound. So in the morning, I know when I'm up here in the morning, and I get up at 5 o'clock to go run or walk, I can hear the trains at East Point, and it sounds like they're on the next ridge. If you're reading the OR, August the 5th, 1864, General Schofield sends a message on the telegraph, so it was preserved. General Sherman, my men are deployed. We're prepared to advance tomorrow. I failed to make significant progress with the 14th Corps, but I will send my corps around on the flank, and I'm close to East Point. I can hear the trains. Guess what? He is 4 miles from East Point, but he doesn't realize it. But all the maps that he were using showed that Utoy was very close to East Point, but they had a hard time determining what the real distance was. But they could hear the trains. So the whole point of this engagement over here was to break the southern lines, to get to the East Point, to cut the line, and siege. There is no siege of Atlanta if this occurs. However, the engagement was not successful. Schofield, even though he had 28 brigades, he had a total of 5 infantry divisions and 1 cavalry division at his disposal, 35,000 troops, 2 corps. He was only facing Bates' division and a part of S.D. Lee's corps, about 2 divisions. So it should have been a walk in the park, but let me tell you what happened. The Southerners ramped up their defense. They were not giving up ground. When he made his first assault at Utoy Creek, it was up along Greenwood Cemetery and along John A. White Park. And he remarked, the skirmishers report that the rebels are not withdrawing as the skirmish line approaches, and they're allowing themselves to be bayoneted. They're not giving up ground. I mean, they're not quitting, because if they quit, Lincoln's coming up for re-election. They have to stop any sort of political success and hope that the Democrat that's running, General McClellan, will make peace with the South.
Now the Confederates, or you said were at Greenwood.
They were at Greenwood and up here. I'll show you on the map in just a second.
But were they driven back from Mosley Park when they made the attack on Howard?
Ezra Church.
On
that
Howard?
Was at Ezra Church.
Was that a different battle?
Yes, that's the Battle of Ezra Church.
Okay, but was it the same troops engaged there as here at Utoy Creek?
No. Those troops stayed up north, farther north. The U.S. 23rd Corps and the 14th Corps were moved to this sector to break the railroad lines. If you'll cut that off a second. You're going to see this in a minute. I have documented where all the positions were. This is the attack. Does this get your attention? This shows where all the units were that made the attack at Utoy Creek and afterwards. Okay? And these are all the lines. Now, I prefer you not take a picture of that.
Okay.
This is the map. I had it blown up for a mere $500. You too can take the OR map, but it shows where we are. Here we are right here. Okay? Now, where this little line is right here is where the house is. They don't show this house, the Poole house, but they do show the Willis house next over. They do show Dr. Gilbert's. They list it, but they don't show where it is.
Now, how did the Poole house transfer over to Adams? Was that just...
No. Dr. Adams changed the route of the road, is what that was. Dr. Adams was a county commissioner for Fulton County. Dr. Adams never owned this house.
Oh, okay. So this was the Poole house up until when?
1900. Now let me show you. Next to the Willis Mill house, when I was growing up, my next door neighbor was my Sunday school teacher lived next door to the Willis house, and as they would cut down trees, they kept messing up their saw. So when he died last year, his wife gave me something they had saved. These are a couple of logs that were saved, and they kept following the saws. Do you see the bullets in them?
Wow.
Do you see the bullets
from
in
this
the
area?
trees from the next street over on Willis Mill? They fire thousands of bullets every day.
Can I take a picture of that?
Sure, absolutely. We'll come back afterwards, but this is just like I said.
Are you gonna write a book?
I've been working on one. I'm not through yet. So let me. I'll give you the overview. This is an original drawing that's going to be in my book of the attack at Utoy Creek. It's never been published.
Where did you get that?
Holland, Michigan. And I'm going to take this. This is a painting that I sell for my friend to benefit the. I sell these for $100, and we use it to raise money for historical markers when I do my different talks around. In Holland, Michigan, they do a reenactment every year of the Battle of Utoy Creek, because all of these soldiers were involved in an attack that is not much written about. It's fascinating. So if you will excuse me for just a moment, I'll let you look around here. And I'm going to, or we'll go, take a look there. Let me just, where'd she go?
So is the floor plan basically the same in this house, you think?
What?
The floor plan?
Of this house and what?
From 1860?
Yes. The only thing that's added, they added the back part of... the back part of this house was added on afterwards.
Okay.
It was sort of a square. Americans lived in this area. Now the Cherokees and the Creek Indians were actually in the Creek Indian area, lived in this area. They had a treaty with the United States government, and the Senate treaty said their lands would remain harmless forever. Well, that turned out to be about 45 years until 1832, when Andrew Jackson, President of the United States, ordered the Army to meet with them down at Indian Springs, halfway down to Macon, and the Indians were told they had to move. The Indians first lived here. Now, the Creek Indians lived here. Now, their village was right here at near the intersection, right here where they do the driving range is, of I-285 and Cascade Road. The Cascade Road was originally called the Sandtown Road because it went to the Indian village of Sandtown on the Chattahoochee.
Oh, cool.
This is the Sandtown Road. When you go into Atlanta, there's a north and south road, okay, that goes up to the Cherokees, okay, and it goes past a fort that was built in the War of 1812. And here's just a little side story for you. So we name things just like, because many of the early settlers were of British ancestry, we got some of their traditions. So when you get to the north side of town up here, there was a famous place to have a beer, right? A tavern. It was called the Buckhead Tavern. So that's how Buckhead gets its name. Then there was another tavern on this side of town. It was called the Lick Skillet Tavern. It became Adamsville. Dr. Adams lived here, was on the city council. He gave all the land that became Adams Park. He was the guy that saved what is now Peachtree Battle to make it into the Bobby Jones Golf Course, Mosley Park. All of these parks were preserved so they could preserve the battle sites from the Civil War, because all these guys, their fathers, and some of them actually served during the war, defending their home city, Atlanta, when the Union Army came here. Not to get into politics, but just the fact. So, what is important about this place right here? This place was never developed. One, because it has an incredible topography here. And this particular area was once the home place of the first physician of Atlanta. Dr. Joshua Gilbert, whose picture hangs at the AMA downtown in Atlanta, was the first physician. He was formally trained at the Augusta Medical College, as was his brother. His brother lived right down here. And unfortunately, in the last 2 years, the house was destroyed. The city of Atlanta gets an F.
On Fairburn.
F. No, not that one. The one that had the veranda right here at Lyndhurst, up on the hill. That was the first house. That was Dr. William Gilbert's house. It was the first house in Atlanta to have running water. Dr. Gilbert had his own little water tank up high, so he had water during that time period, way before the times. So many firsts happened here. But the Indians were moved out. Why were they really moved in 1832? What's the real reason? What's the real reason behind everything? Money. Gold was found. And it was known that there was gold here. The early Spanish that came through here, how many people were talking about the Indian trails? This was an Indian trail. The North and South Trail here that goes through central Atlanta was named because the Indians recovered a substance from the pine trees. It's called pitch. And they would sell this to the British and then to the early colonists. And they would use it on their wooden ships to keep them where they would not sink, and leak. Exactly. So the road that went north to the Cherokees was called Pitch Tree Road. Now later, some marketing person came along. See, you had a predecessor. Someone in marketing came along and they rechanged it to the Peach Tree Road. Have you ever seen any peaches up there? No, you're not going to. It was the Pitch Tree Road that went north. There was Fort Pitch Tree, but again, many of the people that first came here were not educated. They would spell things the way they sound. So right here we have Utoy Creek, but if you happen to go down to Columbus, Georgia, the same creek name was used for the people that lived around the river there. Upatoy, U-P-T-O-I. That name in the Creek Indian language means boundary. So the Indians that lived here lived along the boundary. So that was the significance. We have many sites. There are several sites around here where the Indians worshipped. There's even a small Indian mound in the area. We won't go into that right now. It's on private property, and if we divulged where that was, you'd have some antiquities people digging up somebody's yard. So we'll just keep that kind of low. But there are many sites, and there's an archaeological dig going on in the area right now. 4,000-year-old Indian axes that were made from stone. The Indians here were Stone Age people. They did not figure out how to make iron. They would buy that from the colonists. What's the next big thing that happened? In 1860, in 1861 we had the Great Secession movement that occurred. We're not going to get into politics, but the Civil War occurred. And in 1864, the U.S. Army came and targeted Atlanta. Why? Because Atlanta was a logistics hub. Why is that? Because of the railroads that came here. That was the newest technology of the day. You could actually move people and equipment fast, not taking weeks like it used to take, on the rail. So Atlanta was a railroad center. And because Atlanta was important to the south, it was defended. This red line of works is a series of trenches. The trenches is a ditch.
So we always had a perimeter.
We did. We had a smaller perimeter. This perimeter right here is right along Georgia Tech. This right here is the most famous fort in defending Atlanta. Sherman's picture was taken. It's right on the site of Morehouse College. Yep.
That's where Fort McPherson originally was, and then they moved it out.
Well, you're very close, very good.
Maybe I should
the
say
barracks
the
was right here, very close to it. The original barracks for the Union troops occupying after the Civil War. But this line shows the defenses of Atlanta. Now these defenses ran here. There were the first three battles in Atlanta. The Battle of Peachtree Creek fought on July 20th, 1864. Secondly, the Battle of Atlanta fought on July 22nd. Yesterday was the anniversary. And then the Union Army achieved their objective. They were able to cut off the railroad so the Southerners could not get support from Augusta. So they began shifting their forces on the west side of Atlanta because it was closer for them to get their supplies, right? The Union Army's getting their supplies by rail as they captured up to this point. So it made it logistically simpler for them. And their objective was to quickly cut the railroad between Atlanta and East Point, which is where two railroad lines join, so that they could cut off the Southerners and capture the city. Why is this important? Abraham Lincoln is running for re-election, and he must be re-elected. So they needed a victory. And so the siege of Atlanta was fought. The objective of the way to get a victory was to send the Union Army to break through this line right here, and the Southerners had started building this extension of a line along the Sandtown Road, which is now Cascade Road. This is where we are right here, and there's a line of works back here, and this is the nature preserve right here. And there was a battle here, August 6, 1864.
Okay, y'all, let's go. Let's
and
start
then we'll
walking.
walk along, get you out of the heat. I'm going to put this in my car real quick.
Can you tell us the rest of
Lost a total. Cox's division, there were a total of about 1,000 casualties were initially reported that day, but that's all the troops involved. Immediately up here on the right, where the Temple of the Hillside, Worship Christian Center is up here, there was an artillery battery right on the site on that hill, and across from it were the Union troops that were pretending to about to make an attack. They were lined up like they were on parade with their rifles ready to advance right there in the parking lot of where the Hillside Church was, but they stood there. It was a deception. They were trying to draw the attention of the Southerners while they came around this way. believe it or not, they do a reenactment of this battle here in Holland, Michigan every year, because all these Michigan troops were killed there and they were never recovered. They were still buried over off Adams Drive. They did not get recovered and moved to the National Cemetery.
Wow.
So Mr.
So they're buried as in a cemetery? Or
No, they are not.
like-
They're buried
not
on
marked.
private property. It's not marked. And the Fulton County is aware of it. I took them the manuscript that designates where it was. The U.S. soldier came after the war to recover all the Union dead, but they missed 153 troops from Michigan, the 25th and 26th Michigan.
So there are 153 dead people buried
yes.
Union
over there.
troops.
So,
Union
So
troops.
if anybody like just got to dig in real hard in their yard,
Or does the owner know?
No, it's,
Yeah, I mean, is
they're
it-
buried in a specific place.
On
So
Adams.
There's no building or anything.
private
around
No,
it?
on private property.
Oh.
And
Like
if we went out,
Kurt
I
only knows that it's there.
he does. I sent him a letter.
Okay.
His name is Hank Aaron.
Okay. Okay.
And he said, don't let that, he told his gardener, don't let that Army major back on my property. I was a major then. But I had to go notify the city. They wouldn't respond, and I have an obligation as an Army officer. I learned.
Maybe they sold that property to him, knowing that he would take care of it and preserve it.
He's a
Keep it
great
intact.
man. He's a great man.
So,
Yes.
Come on, let's get
But,
on
yep,
with this
we'll
hike
walk on.
now. 'Cause
Have you reported to the U.S. Archaeological Survey the site?
Nope.
So I,
Only
so
to
my
the
question
ordinary
is,
department.
there's no legal obligation to recover things like that. It's okay for private property owners to have mass graves in their backyard. It seems like that's
It's not really his backyard. It's an unimproved lot.
so.
But he has it fenced off. He's paid for the fencing.
No. It's just out in the open.
Okay.
And it's
Just out in the open.
So why
fine.
did you choose to write him the letter about it?
Because he's the property owner.
And he didn't actually want to act or.
Well, I'm sorry. I messed up here. I'm not trying to start anything.
Oh no, I'm just curious.
I'm just telling you the facts.
I'm not gonna
Yeah.
go harass
So,
Aaron.
the-
It's a losing battle there.
The
Keep your eyes
Hi.
open for snakes.
Jake the Snake is out here. So, yep. So anyway, he is aware, and I think he was unhappy because those lots have now been marked as a site of human burial. They cannot be sold for being improved. And that's the whole point. And my goal is to get it marked or do what we can do. Now, in 1865 or 1866, the U.S. government sent an Army captain here, and he contracted out with a new organization, the Freedmen's Bureau. And many of the first jobs that a lot of African Americans had after the war was working for the Freedmen's Bureau. They would pay $5 in gold for the recovery of every Union soldier, not a Confederate, only the Union. Now, as we're walking this way, now the state of Georgia later paid to recover the Southern soldiers that were buried because they were state troops. Now, as we walk along here, you might see this little structure on the left. You say, what the heck is this thing? In Atlanta, before the airlines were big moving cargo southeast, this was a steam plant, and there were 24 greenhouses here. And the Pitts family ran the Pitts goat farm here. So when you see all the trails, you say, wow, the folks at the Nature Preserve have done a great job making trails. Those trails began as a goat path for the goats, and the goats would eat the vegetation down. Let's keep walking. Now, as we get farther down here on the left, you'll see the remains of the original Cascade Road, or the Sandtown Road. You can see the slope. It comes right here, and it would have crossed down here to the left. There was a bridge where there were two big boulders. They put the bridge, and that's where the Union troops crossed. And as they got about this far for the Battle of Utoy Creek, there was a unit from Kentucky. There's still a trench up here. They were waiting for the Union troops with a purpose. They fired a volley, which caused Cox's division to deploy. And if we were soldiers, we would walk out left and right, and we'd be shoulder to shoulder as far as you can go left and right, and then we would advance to expand our.
Crazy how they used to just like walk into fire. just
Well, not
like-
well. When they were fired upon, it would be just like us. It'd be a column of fours. You ever see the old John Wayne movies? Column of fours forward. You know, that's how they move quickly. But they would deploy by people spreading out in a line, like in that painting I showed you, and then they would advance because the Confederate troops would have been right up here waiting. Now, what they were planning to do is they had their own deception plan. As the Union troops came down the Cascade Road, and you see the boulder on the left, that's where the original bridge was, and the road went right through there. It was just a small road, like about this size,
Sandtown.
Sandtown Road. and it went up through the woods and curved and went near Dr. Gilbert's house. So they first had contact right here, and then the Southern troops there stayed in the face of the Union troops and slowly withdrew and advanced up the Sandtown Road, and they had the Union Army follow them exactly where they wanted them to go. And unbeknownst to the Union Army, there was another brigade on the top of this hill, and they had 3 artillery positions, and they began firing. And the Union troops lost 850 killed. And they were stuck. They could not go forward, they could not go back, they could not deploy, they could not get around. Haskell's division had to come around and relieve pressure, and then the Southern troops withdrew to Adams Park. First to Dodson Drive and then to Adams Park. So that's basically the Battle of Utoy Creek. If General Schofield had done a better reconnaissance, if they had come in and sent troops first to see what's going on, he wouldn't have gotten Cox's division in a trap. So this is why it's of interest to me as a soldier. Now, we'll continue with a couple of tidbits.
When did this become a public park?
I don't know the exact date. This is a tributary of Utoy Creek, absolutely. The soldiers who advanced at the Battle of Utoy Creek would have stopped and got water here. The defenders would have gotten water here. To the left is an interesting spot. It's a waterfall. It was written about 50 years after the Civil War. The Kentucky troops came back to do as veterans will do now. The World War II guys, the Korean War guys go back to the old battlefields they fought at. They would go and visit battlefield sites. Lieutenant L.D. Young said that he visited all the sites that his unit participated in during the Atlanta campaign. How are you, gentlemen?
Good. How are you
Good
doing?
to see y'all.
Steve?
And he said that he had visited the battlefield site at Resaca, at Kennesaw, at the battlefields of Atlanta, and the Battle of Peachtree Creek and Jonesboro. But the only place that was unchanged was a battlefield site at Utoy Creek.
I read that too.
In fact, he and his men had their only refreshing bath, it said in his account, at the waterfall, and he said it was unchanged, and he even found bullets on the ground when he came back to visit. So it's kind of interesting to tie a story in.
So where
Now,
was the waterfall?
we're going to walk
Sorry.
up and see the waterfall,
okay.
but right here I want to tell you the story. Because the Cascade Road went right through here, again, original in Indian Trail, this was the Sandtown Road. In the 18th century, you had to have water for your horse every 7 miles, so this was a stopping point. People would stop and get water for their horse. There were 3 natural springs close by. The Utoy Spring is up at near Fairburn Road, right next to the Starbucks and the McDonald's. This is the Cascade Spring here, and there are 2 houses like this that were built. And what they do is there's still natural water that comes up. You would people would carry a tin cup with them, and you would get the water would percolate out here for humans, and then this was the trough on the left for the horses. I don't know why somebody took this off. There's been some destruction out here lately. I don't know why.
It's summertime and the kids are bored.
So I took a class here when I was teaching a summer school program.
How come there's no spring water out there anymore?
Well, nobody cleans it up. Maybe when I retire, I'll spend a little time on it.
Let me know, I'll help you.
Where does
But
the spring water come
the spring water came out right here. It bubbles out. It still bubbles, but no one is cleaning it out. So if I come in here with my shovel, there's someone's thrown a beer can in there. Great. But if we clean it out, the water will percolate up, and it still comes out. You see it? And you could take your cup, and they had a copper pipe out here, or an iron pipe, more likely.
So who built this?
This was built in the 1880s by Dr. Gilbert. His home was at the top of the hill. He owned this property.
This was built after the war.
After the Civil War, right. But I want to mention it to you. It's an important place. There was also in the 1880s, this area was a place that people would specifically stop. I mean, you're 8 miles from the city of Atlanta, so this is your last stop until you go into Atlanta. It's a nice place to have a picnic. You would stop. You might bring some cold chicken. You need to rest the horses after you've been riding for the last hour and a half. You let the horses rest for a few minutes. Let them get some water in the trough over here. So this is from. And these rocks came from Utoy Creek. Now, what rock is this? I asked all the scouts.
Hubbles?
What is it?
Hubble?
It's a good guess. No. It is quartz.
It's beautiful.
Gold is found in quartz. So, the fellow that came up to Aurora, the little crossroads up near Dahlonega next to that was named for his daughter, had a fellow that came in to see him from the capital of Georgia, Milledgeville, and he said, hey, where'd you get that big piece of quartz? He said, I found it at the creek. We use it to hold the door open. He said, there's gold in that. He said, no, there's not. He said, oh, yeah, there is. That looks like gold to me. So the guy went down, and he took the rock, the large rock, down next time he went to the capital of Georgia, which was Milledgeville, and he had the assay office look at it, and it was the largest single nugget found in Georgia. And that is why the gold rush began in North Georgia, and that's the real reason why the Indians were removed from this area, because there was gold in their area, and the United States government was desperate to have hard currency.
Snapped it. Okay, I got it.
So
Sorry.
that's where the bridge crossed, right there at the boulders, for Cascade Road or the Sandtown Road. And then the road went straight up this hill. That's the route of the road.
You can
We-
kind of
Yep,
see it.
it turned, went right across here and straight up there.
So those are trenches in there?
That is a trench right there. That is a trench right there. It is a hasty trench, and I believe the purpose of this trench, after studying this, the soldiers would get in this. Yep, that's right. The soldiers would get in the trench, and they would be protected. If somebody's firing at you, you got something to protect you, and they would throw up. You can see where they threw the soil on this side. You can always tell whose trench it is by looking at which side is higher for a trench. Do you see that this side is higher over here? Because they're trying to protect themselves from being fired at by the Union troops. All right, and then they had one here in case Union troops came from this direction. This is just a technique. They would tee it off at the end. But let's proceed on down to the waterfall, which is a beautiful sight.
So Perry, those boulders were put there specifically for the bridge? Were they there?
No, those boulders were there. And
Okay.
they chose to use a natural topographical feature. Now, because of usually,
What's on right now that's lined by these?
this is just a path put in by the city,
Oh, okay.
and it's a great path. And the city was kind enough to put a boardwalk because it used to be a rough walk up here. But this is just one of the nice little secrets of our community that people don't realize.
So there's the
Now,
road?
The original Sandtown Road went up that way and curved around the top of the hill. Now you might say, why? Because a horse can only go up a certain grade. With the WPA, with President Roosevelt, they had money to improve roads. So they not only built the cabins at Adams Park and at Grant Park, but they straightened out the Cascade
The
Road here.
pavilions at Adams Park with the grills.
That's right, the
Ah.
pavilions, and there were several cabins built. Now the Parks Department uses them today. The golf course at Adams Park was built. Of course, Dr. Adams was on the city council, and he was the chairman of how they spent WPA money. So hey, he also used, I will just tell you another story we don't usually tell, the prisoners of Georgia were required to work. So Dr. Adams used prison labor to help build part of Adams Park during that time too. So that's just what they did. The road came up that way, and the reason
You
is
mean prison labor or,
was
or,
used.
or slave labor, slave by another name labor? Like
another you
prison
I'm,
camp.
it was people that were imprisoned by the state of Georgia. So, and this was around 1900.
So why was the
Or
road?
imprisoned
Why was
by
the road?
Police department.
Yes, that's what
police
that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
People who broke laws of the state of Georgia.
Why
so.
Why was the road like that?
The Sandtown Road went up this route up, and this was the original route of the Sandtown Road behind this ridge here. And then in 1930s, they straightened the route out right here, and it went right over the tributary where the waterfall is. So they built a unique arch with stone from Elberton, and we'll see that.
I've been through it.
It's nice.
There's somebody else's private yard on the other side,
That is.
which I found out was Dr. Young.
That's right. It
I was
is
all up
Andrew
in his
Young's
backyard
brother.
before I ever met him.
Oh, he
Like,
came out and
"That
greeted
is
you.
a nice house right here.
It's the lead brigade of Cox's division proceeding down the valley. The valley they're talking about is the valley of this tributary right here. And they first tried to attack at the intersection of Dodson Drive and Cascade Road, and they were not successful, so they came around the flank.
No, that would have been heavily forested.
It is not much different today than it was back then, except we have goat trails or trails that are not done by goats but by the Parks Department.
Well, the homes lining the street weren't there.
Oh, that's
The
right.
businesses weren't there.
That's right.
So it would have been very wooded looking. It's pretty cool.
Now, I've been an Army officer. I was a captain. I've been in for 5 years.
Thank you for
I've
your
been
service.
away. I was at Fort Riley. I came home around Thanksgiving, and we had had the worst rainstorm a day or two before, kind of like this with all the trees and the branches down, right? So I came with a friend of mine, an older gentleman who I used to walk around with, and we came right up here to the waterfall. And my interest in the Civil War began when I was a little boy, a Cub Scout, and we were working on a fishing badge. We went through another tributary of Utoy Creek looking for fish with our fishing poles. Didn't see any fish, but we found 3 cannonballs from the Civil War. So I came up here as an Army captain with my friend to see the waterfall right here, and I saw this rusty thing up there, and I told him to wait right here, and I walked around the side there, walked up. It had just rained, and guess what was sitting on the side of the waterfall?
Bullet.
A cannonball, another one. So I have 4 cannonballs. I don't have a metal detector that I found. I was so excited, I walked back, I slipped and fell in the water. Lieutenant L.D. Young of the 4th Kentucky Infantry was in rifle pits overlooking this spot. And this is the exact spot he writes about in his memoirs, around 1912. And he says that my men and I visited all the battles that our unit fought in, and I visited one place that was unchanged as if we had left yesterday. The rifle pits were still at the top of the hill. There was a boulder, you can see the boulder up there, and the spot where my men and I took our only refreshing bath at the waterfall. So this is it. He even said that he found bullets in the ground as they walked around. So keep your eye open, you might find one. This is a lovely spot to get a picture, I think. I'm tempted to look around. You never know.
Take a few minutes.
The water here is pretty good. In the 18th century, the Army came to a similar conclusion that the British Army did. In 1855, the British Army, in the Crimean War, in Sevastopol, in the Ukraine, decided that soldiers who drank tea were healthier and they got sick less often. So the British Army began issuing tea because a soldier who drank tea was healthier and got sick less often. The U.S. Army during the Civil War began issuing coffee because they determined that soldiers who drank coffee were sick less often. The same thing. What became the Surgeon General of the Army came to that conclusion. What's the rest of the story? The real truth is they didn't know about germs back then, so it was the boiling of the water that probably made it healthful so they didn't get sick. But soldiers would have drank running water like this, and most people did. It would be better to drink water out of a spring because it came straight from the ground. There would be no chance of bacteria. Okay? Now, people on the wagon trains that went out west had problems sometimes. Yeah, see how people are up in the water up there? If you drink water that other people have bathed in, you can get a disease that is absolutely fatal. It's called cholera, and it's very contagious. And thank God for the City of Atlanta Water Works, because they put a little bit of chlorine in all of our water, so we can't get cholera, or it'd be really hard.
Over here?
Well, but if you drank this water,
I was gonna say this
it
is
should, your dog can drink it, my dog drinks it, but the best thing to do would be to boil it, which would get rid of any contaminants. A post office here. And the Georgia Battlefield Commission, Charlie Crawford, a retired colonel from Fort McPherson, and his group raised a lot of money. And they were able to together buy this and talk the city into make it into, at one time it was going to be named the Utoy Creek Battlefield Park, but it was named, the agreement was to call it the Cascade Nature Preserve, because it is a nature preserve. But it is also really that Battlefield Park as well. And then, of course, we have the other addition recently in the last 5 years. Our famous Atlanta, Mr. Lionel Hampton, purchased the property on North Utoy Creek where the Union Army occupied before they made this attack. And there is a wonderful line of trenches up there that is excellently preserved up along the Lionel Hampton Park as well. So it's a treasure. People come to Atlanta to see the Civil War. Many visitors come, but they get trapped in going to Kennesaw and Marietta. They don't come to the city of Atlanta. I gave a talk to the Chamber of Commerce up in Marietta about 6 months ago, and I don't think they were happy with what I said. I said, hey, it's great to be in Marietta, but remember, Marietta was the appetizer. Atlanta was the main course that the Union Army was interested in. So, but they think they have capitalized on our history. But a lot of people come here, and again,
Atlanta's done a terrible job preserving our history.
Atlanta has not would get an F really in preservation. they've done a good job with, even with Dr. King. You know, Dr. King's father's church was where South Fulton Hospital is. And it was destroyed to build South Fulton Hospital.
Another fun fact, which I told a few people, that the first library, public library in the United States was in Atlanta. It was downtown, and we tore it down. The Carnegie money went through and built all the public libraries.
The Carnegie Library, I went to it as a little boy.
And we tore it down. We tore it down.
The ruins are in the old Atlanta prison farm. All the ruins were dumped over in the prison farm. You can go through there and see like the entablature from the library in Greek, you know, the Greek or the Roman lettering.
They saved some.
As an Atlanta as a military historian, my training is to look at military history. So that's my training. That's my scope that I look at. Captain Lieutenant Meebane, this is the two-gun battery. Did you come here?
Yeah, they said this was the trench.
This is the two-gun battery.
Okay.
This is a part of it. Look out. You got, hang on. You see the...
Yeah. So there was a...
This is the two-gun battery. You will notice there's a line of works here. There's a trench in the front too. And there was a third trench. There were 3 lines. They knew this is the northern point of Bates Line. And my watch here has a compass on it. Here is where a section of 2 guns were placed, right here. Now you say, 2 guns, big deal. Well, it is a big deal here because if you know the history of Bates Division, how much trouble can 2 guns cause, right? The 2 guns that were here were 3-inch ordnance rifles with a 2-mile range. They were captured from the Union Army at the Battle of Chickamauga by Bates Brigade, and they stayed with Meebane's Tennessee Battery the rest of the war until they were recaptured by the Union Army at Nashville when Bates' division was stormed over. Bate never wrote a history because he tried to be non-political after the war. He had some great exploits. The Battle of Utoy Creek was a great victory, but the routing at Nashville when one of his brigades was taken away was an embarrassment. So to avoid talking about the embarrassment, he didn't talk about the good either. So we have a lapse in history. But I find it interesting. There were 3 sections just like this. This is a section where 2 guns were here, and they had infantry to the front. There was 2 guns down there and 2 guns down there. If you look at due north, this is pointed directly due north. They sighted this, and this lands exactly where the Kentucky troops brought the Union Army, and they fucking opened up on them, and it was steel rain from hell. It was so much problem. If you're reading the correspondence, Riley writes in his attack, we were being enfiladed by a battery on the far right, on the rebel left. So he sent 2 regiments, the 8th Tennessee Infantry and the 123rd Illinois, to storm this position. They got only to an abrupt hill. I'm going to take you to that hill. And they stayed there the whole day firing at this position. They could never get up here. There was incredible firepower. Now, an interesting nuance of the Battle of Utoy Creek is the lead Union brigadier who was coming in to attack was Brigadier General Riley. He was promoted to Brigadier General on July 31st, 1864. Just 7 days prior to the battle. The brigade commander here for the Confederates was Colonel Thomas Benton Smith, who was promoted to Brigadier General on July 31st, 1864, the same day as his future adversary. Just a little interesting story. Thomas Benton Smith was from Tennessee. He was called the Boy General. He was very good. In the history of the 10th Tennessee Infantry, they write, the Boy General, they called him Colonel Smith at that time, not realizing whoever wrote it at the time that he'd been promoted at that time. They said Colonel Smith led a charge to the enemy who was on an abrupt hill to our immediate front, and he captured the regiment and their colors. That was the 123rd Illinois and the 8th Tennessee Infantry. When you're reading the Battlelets and Leaders of the Civil War, it says that 3 stands of colors were captured from the Federals. They were the 8th Tennessee, U.S., not C.S., the 123rd Illinois, and the 25th Michigans that were captured over here. Those were the 3 colors that were captured. That is a big no-no when the ladies of your hometown makes the colors. For you to have your colors captured is the worst thing, almost the worst thing to happen to your unit. It's like your heart and soul, because the commander is with the colors are with the commander. Usually the commander gets killed is what happens, is when that thing happens. So is that this line of trenches that went straight down here. You'll notice hardwoods up here, pine trees and smaller hardwoods here. I believe all this was farmed. So after the war, why do they want to preserve another ditch? They don't. So they farmed it. So this is why we don't know exactly where the other two gun positions were. But I do want to take you and show you. So let's just walk along. But this is important. This is a big thing. So if Jordan and them, so you didn't see the line of connected rifle pits? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I wish
we just saw this, and they called this a trench, and then we saw the thingamajig you just showed me, the battery.
Wow. Okay. Well, if I show them, wow, that looks like a bullet. Look. Where's the name? Oh, never mind. I'm sorry. I saw white. I found bullets out doing this. After it rains, just like this. I found when I went to look at the Cascade Mansion that I bought from the estate, from the doctor who bought Dixie Stevens' estate.
The Poole house?
The Poole house.
Yeah.
When I went back to look at it, I took my wife at the time up there, and we were just like this, and there were 2 infield bullets, I swear to you, just lying on the ground. I said, oh my God, this is a sign. The Lord, I have to buy this house. I knew the house was, she told me by tradition that it had been a general's house, but she couldn't tell me who. It has to be Bate. Because Bate.
Do you think he was there?
I'm sure. Look at where it's located. It's immediately behind the lines. He has command and communication along a road, a known road. That's where the commanding general is. The commanding general is not in the front trench. You don't want him killed. Although Bate was wounded 10 days on the 10th of August, a spent shell hit him in the leg, and he was hospitalized. I believe all this is the remains of the trench here. So you can see it. So that hill right there is as far as the 8th Tennessee and the 123rd Illinois were at. And if you read the account in the 10th Tennessee Infantry, it says specifically, a group of Union soldiers made a lodgment to our immediate front. General Smith led a charge, and they captured the 2 regimental colors.
So Smith came out from out here and made a charge up the hill?
But let me tell you what I know. These guys ran out of ammunition. Hey, they're not stupid. They stopped shooting and they still see them. Now's the time to charge, baby. You can figure it out.
So they went in the valley and then up the hill.
And captured, or they came down also from that side. You have a whole brigade up here. You have 1,800 soldiers, and they swooped down on those guys, captured their ass. The colonel of the 123rd Illinois left his men. They were captured, but he survived. He snuck away. Schofield fired him and sent him home. He left his men. In Michigan, a soldier who wound up being in Michigan had been wounded from the 123rd Illinois. He had just been hit in the head, boom, and it put a hole in his hat. So he kept his hat. After the war, he gave it. It's in a museum. It says, this soldier was wounded at the Battle of Utoy Creek. And he exchanged his good rifle for a soldier's rifle he just jammed. And the story at the museum is this rifle had 3 or 4 charges in it. So what happened is people get nervous. They fire, and with all the smoke of the battle, they don't hear that their gun didn't go off. So they put another charge in it. And now it's a friggin' useless, except as a bayonet, you know. Can you see the top of the hill? Where the enemy is? Not really. But I believe they stayed all along here, along the edge, and they were here for the day, and then they were charged. There's some sort of remnant here of some sort of work. It may have been a rifle pit they were building, but I believe they were right here. And this is at Abrupt Hill. In front, so they say the 10th Tennessee and Abrupt Hill in our immediate front had a lodgment of Union soldiers. The 10th Tennessee charged them. 10th and 20th Tennessee regiments charged them, captured them. What they didn't say is what I know. They ran out of ammunition. I know both sides of the story. These guys ran out of ammo. They fired all their ammo, didn't get resupplied, and that's why. Hey, you're going to charge the enemy when you think he's weak? Yeah, not when he's full up, right? So I believe this is as far as the Union troops got right here. The rest of Cox's division is up on that hill, way up there, where they're trying to break through, and they never got up the hill.
Huh.
It was a bad reconnaissance. Why? Because this ridge is a closed ridge, like a closed horseshoe. They can't get around it. But they didn't know until they got in here. It's a trap.
And this is the very far right end of the Union line for the whole army, isn't it?
Not yet. It is at that time. It did expand another 2 miles down to the Atlanta Christian College. I can show you where those lines are, if you wish. Any particular questions here?
I don't think so. Those rocks certainly look curious, don't they?
Somebody moved them. Now, if you're being shot at, you got motivation to build up something, don't you?
Well, and
I think
you'd have to get a lot of men because those things are heavy.
There were 2 regiments here. There's about 700 men here trying to break through over there.
Yeah.
You think 700 men can move some rocks when they're getting their ass shot at and they need some cover?
Now, do you own this house?
I do.
Okay.
I certainly do. The Lord bless me.
So what's underneath all this stucco?
There is brick, and then there is the original structure. Don't you feel the temperature drop 10 degrees when we come in the door?
You're
It's
right.
just amazing. Here's my little war room where I do my. We have arm tastings, things like that. I make a fire.
This
in
is
here.
a really cool room.
And I use the original. I like to use the kerosene lights for the effect.
Great book.
This is Joseph Willis Jr. His dad owned the house. He is the son who's in what is the most iconic unit. If you go to the cyclorama.
That's a Willis?
That's Joseph Willis Jr.
Now, he owned this house?
He did after his dad died. His dad's famous quote was, yep, I lived in Fayette, Henry, DeKalb, and Fulton counties, but I never moved a single time. Now, this hasn't been published yet, so.
Oh, you want me to take a picture of it?
Well,
That's all right.
I might hold on that.
All
And then,
right.
of course, I've got Dr. Davis's book that has
I love that
a
book.
drawing. This was General Cox's headquarters. At the bottom of the hill, the trenches run there. And I want you to come right here because my plan is to put a National Park Service marker right here. Because from right here, you can see the Willis House, Cox's headquarters, and you can see the hill where Bates' division went to. The Confederates are right there, and the skirmishers are at the bottom of the hill, and they are so close, they could throw rocks at one another.
I didn't know they had doorbells in the 1860s.
The Taylor Door Company came out with the new technology of the day. That's
You
kidding, huh?
The thing is Perry, you can see the wear over time. Like, just look at that.
All I did was
Just from-
it's actually missing something, but I screwed it in just for the heck.
But I mean, just over time from people's hands
Yeah.
on it.
1860. Let's walk back here. I want to show you what was grown over an ivy, and I dug under it and had that cleared off, and it is actually the foundations for the kitchen. Now, really, you've seen the picture of the Willis bomb proof?
Uh-huh.
You want to look at it again while we're out here?
Oh no, I've
Well,
seen
okay.
it. I got good mind in my eye. What it looks like.
It was taken. Now, let me paint a picture for you. Again, the Union Army is facing this way. The enemy is over there. The general is using this headquarters. They cut out the top of this. The top of the house they cut out and they used it for a signal station because this is on top of the hill. Who they're signaling to, I don't know, but it shows it's cut out. That's what they typically did. Now, right here, this was covered over with ivy. I wasn't sure what it was, but it's the original kitchen. This is the kitchen foundation.
Oh, so you just removed this recently?
Not in the last year. I had all this. I've had all this stuff taken off. I've been working on it.
Which makes sense because they always had the kitchen separate from the
Kitchen's
house.
Always here. And in Mr. Kurtz's comments, he said, "I visited the site of the bomb proof, the only stucco house on the Willis Mill Road, and the side of the bomb-proof, which was 50 feet behind the kitchen. It was right there. Look at where if you look at where the drawing was, the bomb-proof was down here. And there's a sunken in place. So, got to take the tape, but I believe the bomb-proof was right back here. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or either here or here, because it showed in a line. If you look at the picture, it might have been even back here. But it showed, man, I'm getting spiders on me too. So, if you go by the drawing, it would be more like over here. So I don't know, he did his drawing.
Well, if he said 50 feet behind the kitchen, you'd think he would have said left or right.
Well, I think it's right here. I think it's right around here. I've done a little excavating right here, and I'm thinking this could be it. It's sort of squared off. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you look at his painting, he shows the kitchen, and then you can see the house.
Oh, okay.
So it looks like it'd be right in this area. Now the barn is right there, so they could have gone to the barn to get support for the horse. The well is back over there. So I think it was right here.
Huh. Well, it looks like there's an indentation
There is.
Uh-oh.
This is a polk plant. It is edible. You peel the leaves off when
Polk?
they're green like this, P-O-L-K, just like President Polk. You boil it. You have seen these on your car. They turn a brilliant blue, pinkish, purplish color. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Union soldiers all wrote home on ink made from the polk berry.
Huh.
Squash the berry and it turns out a pink color, but it dries a light brown. That's why the Declaration of Independence is not black, but has a light brown color to it. It's made with polkberry ink.
Huh.
Now I picked these and eat them.
How old do you think that Willis house is then?
1839. It's very specific.
Okay.
It was complete.